Welcome to the Spirit of Business episode number 52, Speaking About Your Purpose with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum.
Hi Sarah.
Hi Matt.
I had a really interesting conversation with a client today, and it reminded me of something or a concept that I often talk to business owners about, and that's around the word genuine. And so whenever we talk about their business, we talk, as you know, I love talking about the purpose and the why, and why you're doing what you're doing and what's the purpose of it and those sorts of things, and have long conversations with business owners around trying to find their why and in their purpose in their business, which helps to connect with them. We've had lots of conversations about that historically and that point. And we talk about, how do you know when you found your why, or how do you know when that is the thing? And one of the tests that I often get people to do is, once they've come up with their statement around the purpose of the business or the why, is to go and start to talk about it, which is a test and measure principle to it. So they start to go out to the public and they'll start to talk about it to anyone that'll listen to them. I said, just go out there and talk about your why. And what will end up happening is that you'll then feel something in your body as to work out whether you are genuine or not genuine. And it's kind of a bit of a crude way of thinking about it, but I talk about it in terms of the sphincter test. And most people start to cringe when I say that, but which is the whole point, is that what happens is that when you're saying something you don't fully believe in, you tend to cringe or clench. And your sphincter might be the thing that you cringe or clench. So I say that if you're doing that, it generally means you're full of shit, that you're actually not saying what you genuinely believe. And therefore, that's testing whether the thing that you're talking about around the purpose or the why is true or not true. And when you don't cringe and clench, you're typically more likely to be genuine about what you believe in terms of your business. So I wanted to talk about that today in terms of this genuineness and integrity, I think is a word around purpose and business.
Integrity is definitely the word that I would use. And I would say that there's the other level, which is when you're really, really aligned with your purpose. It's not just that you don't cringe. It's actually that speaking about it makes you feel really good and makes other people feel really good. In fact, it's an exercise that I often get business owners to do, is to talk absolutely openly about the purpose of their work. And they come away from it glowing. They love that experience so much. And it makes me realize how little opportunity people give themselves to talk with integrity about what they're doing and why they're doing it.
It's quite amazing. And I did an exercise with a business owner last week to connect him back into the business and talk about the purpose and the why, because he really couldn't feel it and couldn't connect in with that. And so I took him sort of up a level and away from the day-to-day. And when I was doing that, he struggled for a period of time, and he kept really talking about the how and what in the business rather than the why. And that's what most default positions are for people, is they talk about what and how they do what they do, and not necessarily why they're doing it. And more often than not, when we go through this exercise, people end up in the what and the how and not the why. Anyway, I managed to shift him to a degree, and I could see the why quite clearly and started to talk to him about that. And he wasn't quite there, and it felt he didn't feel comfortable, even though that was probably, he could see that was the purpose and the why. He didn't want to actually acknowledge it, because then he didn't feel there's some sort of, and I think, you refer it to as imposter syndrome. There felt like there was some sort of imposter going on there. And he also didn't want to sort of put up his hand for the tall poppy syndrome to say, well, actually, that's the reason why I do it. I didn't want to feel like, in Australian terms, didn't want to feel like a wanker, all right, which is what is what we use here to when you don't feel genuine about what you're doing. And anyway, it's interesting because then a week later, um, he still on the what and the how very, very clearly, and not necessarily the why. And every time he'd come back to me with saying, "Is this a statement?" I'm going, "I'm still on the what and the how." Anyway, then I had a session with his team, and it was interesting that some of the team actually had a greater sense of this why, or the greater sense of the emotional aspect of the business than what the business owner was able to articulate, feel better about. And anyway, a couple of the team members started to talk in a language that I could see was the purpose of the business owner, but the business owner had a block on it. And what was the interesting part about it was when the people were talking, I fed back to them what they were talking. So I summarized and feedback and put it into some sort of better way of articulating it. And the hairs on the back of my neck always rise when I feel that particular way. Like I feel good that I'm working with an organization that's got this great purpose. And that's my sort of litmus test on the test on, is this thing a thing that we feel comfortable with or not? And I just love what you said. It was a glow before is exactly right. And when I started to, get the team involved, and then the business owner started to feel more aligned with it and more alive to it because there was validation for other people and this nice connection happening. It's such a great feeling when you're able to start to articulate exactly the connection point back into the organization from a purpose perspective. So there is that great feeling that comes along with it. And every time I do it, I just love it. It's such a great buzz for me too.
It feels really important to me because to me this is about character. And if we need validation from other people to speak about or share what we're really about, it's very difficult to achieve something that's meaningful to you. One of the things that I find myself working a lot with people is helping them to recognize what is the unique thing that only they in the whole world, in the whole universe can do. That is their piece to do. And it's never the whole of anything, but there's always a piece that is theirs. And I believe that probably the vast majority of people never really step into that, partly because they're not clear, and then sometimes when they are clear, because they're not willing to speak openly about it. They want to look good in front of other people, or they want people to approve of them in some way, and so they don't quite dare to say what they're really about. And there's such a loss to all of us and to them from that kind of approach. Because if you think about all the really great people, they are all people who are willing to stick by their values when everyone else was saying it should be different. You think about people like Mandela is a very obvious example, or Gandhi, they're really great people. Why do we look up to them? Because they never followed the values of the crowd. They always stood by higher values that uplifted the crowd rather than devolving towards the crowd. And so I feel that being able to speak about your purpose and also your values, the things you really, really value, is part of character development. And it's part of developing your uniqueness and your greatness, ultimately, your potential.
I love the word uniqueness because that's exactly what is always the key thing that resonates. So when you're looking for, it's like the X factor, it's like the piece that you go, that's the connection point. That's the point of difference that people feel good about, that raises the hair on the back of your neck, that makes you feel genuine about what you're doing and where you're going. So I really find that is the thing that when you get that, that's the connection point where people go, oh, that feels good. That feels like now I understand exactly what it is. And it's infectious because when somebody actually does that and leads from the front, then everybody else falls into line, which is that leadership piece that you're talking about. It's the piece where people are prepared to stand up for what they believe in, and that they're prepared to talk about it, and prepared to lead an organization that actually stands for this particular thing. And that's when you really feel it, and that's when there's such joy. I get such joy when I see people connect in and get that glow, as you say, and then once they've got it, they can lead. But without having that, it's very hard for them to lead because they don't know really what they're leading.
It's kind of leading by deficit rather than leading by attraction. When you have that, there's an attraction to it, and it'll attract the right people and it will push away or repel the wrong people. So it actually works as a very strong filter as well, in order for you to, both for opportunities for team, for any aspect of the business, there's a very strong attraction factor in that kind of approach, which is important to realize, because if you can lead through attraction, most of your work is done for you.
Exactly. And that's why it becomes the X factor. And whenever I start the conversations with business owners in my program, Business by Design, that we run, which actually helps to connect business owners back into their business and design it the way that they want to design it, we start with that particular piece because it's the foundation of a great business. It's the starting formula, and it's the lens that everything gets put through, I believe. And every decision that's made up post that should connect in with that statement, okay, or that reason. And so it makes everything else flow so much easier when people actually have that connection and that sense.
I think there's something important to say about speaking about it, because that's where people tend to fall down when they need to speak to somebody else. You can have a statement, and when you make that statement, or when you first articulate that statement, that can be a hair standing up on the back of your neck kind of moment. And maybe that statement goes on your website somewhere, maybe it becomes part of your pitch or whatever it is. But sometimes when you say the statement later, it doesn't necessarily have the same feel to it because you've said it before and you don't always have that really fresh moment. And I think it's important to recognize that once you've found that defining statement, that's incredibly useful as a kind of touchstone. It's like, that's where we're going, that's how we make decisions, that's the essence of what this business is about, and you can always have a look to it for that. But I personally find that if I would just say that to somebody, it probably wouldn't work. I normally need to talk about the purpose of why I do what I do with people in a way that suits the moment. So, and the thing that's important about that is, and which is actually an interesting challenge, it's then not just being able to repeat your statement, and it's also not just being able to talk about your purpose, but it's being able to talk about it from a place of inner alignment with it. So it's like you've got to be in the mood when you talk about it. If you're talking about it, it's just like something that's out there, and you're not living and breathing it as you speak about it, you will experience imposter syndrome, or you'll feel like a fraud, or you'll feel that it's not real or disconnected from it. So if you want to talk about purpose and have a good experience of that, you actually need to be in it as you speak about it. And that's something that you learn and you get better at with practice.
I agree. And it's interesting when I talk about our purpose in business, I always start with a statement. The reason why this business exists and why we created it in the first place and our founding philosophy is because, and then I'll talk about the why, right? But that, even those words that I use up front, and I intentionally slow myself down when I say though that opening statement, because it actually helps you ground and connect with what you're about to say. And so it's just not just this repetitive thing that you just throw out there as a statement. You're prefacing it with saying, we exist and our whole philosophy exists and our whole business was created on the basis that this is our philosophy and this is why we're doing what we're doing. And for me, it almost is a switch for my brain to say, no, I'm not just going to say this because it's a pretty statement or whatever it is. I'm saying it because I'm slowing myself down to remind myself that this is why I do what I do. And therefore, that's when the connection occurs. So I never say it in a way. I've learned not to say it in a way as just a sales speech. I say it in a way that I feel. And there's some sort of technique that obviously I've learned over the years that helps me do that.
Because probably you've had times when you couldn't feel it so strongly, or you didn't feel so aligned with it, even if it was what you were doing every day. You must have had that
Mm.
experience of speaking about it.
Absolutely. And of course you do. You have some dark days where you don't feel it as much anymore, or that you think when people don't value what you do for them, and that's when you start to question, is this right? Is this my purpose? If nobody's valuing it, why would I value it? Because, and that's when the doubt starts to creep in, and you've got to then check in with it. And I've had moments, and it's probably a good point that you make there. There's times where I've gone, really? Is this really what I believe? Is this really why I'm doing what I'm doing? Um, because are people actually getting value from it? And, are people enjoying what I'm doing? So there's all that stuff that starts to resonate. And then that's when you have to have the resilience and the resolve to check in, and the honesty too, to say, well, actually, no, I've had a bad couple of moments, or a bad couple of weeks, or a bad couple of experiences, but in the whole quantum of what I've done, it's, you know uh, it still is the right thing to do, and it is still the purpose and why I do what I do.
To me, that is so important. I often watch people, and I've watched myself do it as well, where somebody asks you about why you do what you do, and because you're not feeling great about it at the moment, or because it's a little bit off, you start to downplay it, and so you answer the question, but full of doubt and hesitancy, and you convey that immediately to the other person. And I see that happen so often in business, where people respond to a question like that based on how they're feeling right now about whatever's been happening in the last few hours or the last few days. And actually, the point about a purpose statement, or speaking about your purpose, is that it takes you beyond what's happening right now and what's been happening the last few days, and it connects you with what you're creating. So it doesn't matter what kind of mess you have at the moment, actually, because your purpose is the direction of what you're creating. And therefore, maybe part of creating that is clearing up the mess that you're in. The mess is not relevant. But so often we feel like, and I can see myself do this, I need to convey the mess to the other person so they don't think that I'm somehow proud or overconfident or whatever it is. But that's complete nonsense. Actually, we need to convey our purpose to somebody and be confident that I'm in the process of cleaning up some messes which need to be done in order for me to be able to continue in the direction of that purpose.
Yeah, so therefore what you're saying is that you might say something but feel like a fraud because you've got a mess. So therefore it doesn't actually feel like the outsider would look at you and go, hang on a minute,
Yeah,
you're not necessarily living that particular purpose, because you've got to, it's like, they talk
yeah,
about the plumber that's got a leaky tap sort of type principle at home, that you've got a mess in your own backyard that you need to clean up. So I suppose that we downplay it because we're embarrassed to agree from that. But it's interesting with what you just said then, because I just checked in with myself too, that I now use the statement as a motivator out of the situation, because I'm going, I might feel pretty average about something that's going on in business or in the world that I live in. And then when I get the opportunity to say, well, actually, the reason why this business exists and the whole philosophy and the purpose behind it is to, and then I talk about the why statement, actually lifts me out of that. It actually now becomes that reminder and that motivator to go, yeah, okay, I know that I'm probably having a bit of a crappy day or whatever it is, or I've had a few moments where it hasn't been great, or a number of times, but it's a good reminder for me, and it sort of straightens me up a little bit to give me the momentum and the motivation to go, okay, I understand where I'm at the moment. I'm going to be responsible and clean up whatever I need to clean up, but this is why I'm going to do it, because this is the purpose of what I'm doing.
yeah. And that's really powerful to be able to do that. And personally, I think, everybody should aspire and practice even being able to speak about why you do what you do with that absolutely genuine energy, with true integrity, because it has that dual purpose. Not only does it convey to somebody else and attracts people, but because it also takes you above and beyond. It lifts you out of the details of what you're doing and into the direction. And it's like the classic example that's given all the time about flying to the moon, and that you need to keep adjusting your course a little bit to make sure you're going towards the moon. But if you're so caught up in the dials and all the stuff that's going on that you forget that you're going to the moon, then you could get way off course. So it's also a kind of course correction system that enables you to do every single day the things that are taking you in that direction by the values that are implicit in your purpose. It brings together both the direction and the actions along with the values. Because otherwise we can get into, I've got to reach that goal at any cost, and we throw our values out. Or we get so into our values, I've got to do it this way and not that way, that we completely forget about where we're going, and we start going off in a different direction. But that purpose, when it's spoken about well, brings all of that together.
The other part of the formula that I believe works too is that also showing that there's some sort of progression towards achieving that purpose. So, the statement, the why statement that, that Simon Sinek talks about, or the formula to that is what contribution you're making to get an impact. Okay, so contribution and impact are the two things that you put together in a why statement. And so the impact is the outcome or the benefit that somebody's actually receiving from the contribution that you're making. And so the other thing that I really focus on when we're talking to business owners about this is, well, what is the actual impact that you're having? And which becomes sort of the noble goal, which we've spoken about before. And if we can actually keep showing that we're achieving that noble aspect of why we've created what we've created, it also encourages us to keep the momentum going forward, because then you don't need the validation, like you said before, from somebody else, because you're getting constant validation from the outcomes that you're getting from the contributions that you're putting in. So I think that's certainly something that I encourage people to do, to say, well, if that's your purpose, what does the outcome of that purpose look like? And how would we be able to then show whether that future is turning up or not? And that also helps with this motivation and connecting in with the business.
It's interesting. Buckminster Fuller talked about the principle of procession. I'm not sure if I've ever spoken about it on this podcast before. But it's easy enough to forget it, and it's worth repeating. So the principle of precession is that the impact, if an object is moving, the impact happens at 90 degrees to the direction it's moving. So if you drop a pebble into a pond, the impact happens, the ripples go out across the pond. And so you get to this thing which is very real, where you can only actually see a tiny bit of the impact that you're creating, because there's only a tiny bit of it that really comes back to you. And I get emails from people telling me their life has changed because they've read my book or because they've done a course. So those are the bits that I see. But from time to time I get a glimpse of the people who I never knew what was happening with them, and there was stuff happening. And I think that that's very important to remember, that the vast majority of the impact you're having, and I would have to say positive or negative, but because we're talking about purpose, let's focus more on the positive. You will never see, but you get signs and indications of things going in the right way. So it seems like we only need a very little bit of food, like some emails, some testimonials, some client results, some good feedback, and of course the business is running successfully. But actually the vast majority of it, you're never ever going to know. It's kind of amazing to think about that.
It is quite amazing, and it's something I've just reflected upon recently. And there's two elements of that I resonate with. One is that you might bump into somebody, years later, after you might have, employed them, or you might have, had a interaction with them as a client or something like that. And they'll often say, "Remember when you said this to me?" I'm going, "Oh my God, what did I say?" and you start to cringe about what you might have actually said to them that they've taken, because it's amazing how many times you could say thousands of words to somebody and they pick up on one sentence or one slither of it and they remember that. And I'm going, that wasn't actually the point. There was all this other stuff that was the point. Anyway, so sometimes you have those moments where you go, oh, actually, no, I actually meant this, but that's okay that you interpret it that way. And the other part of that is when you've written a book, which you've written a number of books and I've written a book, and people come back to you and say, I love that sentence or that bit in the book. And everybody comes back with a separate sort of type thing. And you don't really understand the impact that you're actually having and who's actually having that impact for. And I had another experience where somebody in the government said to me, I really liked reading your book. And I said, why is that? And she said, because in the government, we've never run a business, but we know how to facilitate programs to run businesses. But I liked your book because it actually taught me how to run a business, so to speak. And she said, so then I bought it for the other people in our organisation to be able to say, well, now we know how to, this is a bit of a how-to and insight into how to run a business. And it's things like that. You go, I wouldn't have had any idea, unless you told me that, I wouldn't have had any idea that actually had that sort of level of impact on something. So you're right, in this 90 degrees, we only get a small slither of what impact we could be having. And that's where, if we're not getting that 90 degrees impact, we can start to lose faith because we can't see the deeper impact that we might be having for people because we don't get that constant repetition of feedback all the time. And that's when I think the conversation around trust and knowing that you're actually doing, regardless of whether you're getting this feedback or not, if you feel that you're confident in what you're doing and are on purpose, then that's enough.
Yeah, that's the most important thing, because some people have to do the right thing for them for years and years and years before it really begins to work well. And some people get much faster results. And often you don't really know what's around the corner. But I see that sticking out what you know deep inside yourself resonates for you and expressing the uniqueness that is you, making your unique contribution. There's so much reward in that. And as you learn how to be able to speak genuinely about it and share it with integrity with other people, that becomes rewarding in its own right. And then the bigger rewards of the success and the wider impact will show up over time, and everybody has their own time. I do have a question. Can I do a little plug for your book?
Oh, sure.
It's called From Dream to Realization. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
From Dream to Realization, the business owner's journey?
That's right.
I got it right, by Matt Murphy. I'm sure it's available on all the regular
yes, on Amazon
outlets.
And all of it.
It's on Amazon and everywhere else. So there you are. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for the plug. The point that we're making though is that I think at certain points in time we've all lost that motivation, that spark from the dark days of running businesses and I know that I've been in places where I'm going, I've really questioned it, and because I haven't had any feedback for a while, I haven't had any positive feedback for a while, but just the recognition of going and speaking to somebody about it gives you yourself that spark is probably the point that we're making too. And I think it's important to not play small with it, because we often play small, and we've got to actually not play small. And we know we're renowned in Australia for playing small because of the tall poppy syndrome, but we have to fight that and be out there and be honest about why we exist and what we kind of do. And I think that's part of the challenge for us, is to, when we do feel like that we're not quite there or we're not too sure, getting it out there is the point.
And let's also add, not play big, because in some other countries it's completely the opposite of Australia or UK or New Zealand, that will all tend to underplay. But there are many people in the world who are pretending that they're way more on purpose and way bigger than they actually are, and that also doesn't resonate. So that doesn't create attraction. The attraction comes from the word you used right from the very beginning, which was genuine, from being genuine or having integrity. And you have integrity when it resonates, so you can feel a kind of wholeness through your whole being as you speak about it. It's not like this is what's in my head, but what I'm feeling is something different and my body's doing something else again. It's a sense of wholeness as you speak. It's almost like the words you're using are aligning and bringing everything into a kind of harmony, so that it feels really good to use those words because every bit of you agrees with them and wants to step into that purpose that you're describing. That's how you know that it's right, because the resonance and the wholeness is there, which is integrity. It's not because it's the biggest goal in the world or because you're going to save 1 billion people. It's none of that. It's about what really comes from the inside of you. That is what you feel deeply in whatever way you can, that you can contribute to the betterment of human life.
I think you just summarized that beautifully then in terms of bringing the whole topic together, and the word wholeness, that you feel it in every aspect and you feel it from inside out rather than outside in. And I think that's an important statement to make. So it's certainly been a good chat in relation to this particular concept, and it's a good reminder for me, because every time I do this work, it just really makes me feel good. And the purpose of this conversation today was, this is a great formula to feel better, and this is a great formula to feel better in business. And so do the exercise and continually check in with the exercise is the point that I really like to make.
Yep, I completely agree with you. Thank you very much, Matt.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you for listening to The Spirit of Business with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum. We'll be back next week with another episode. You'll find the show notes with links and other useful information on our website, spiritofbusiness.live. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends.